So thank you all for joining, and this is our April session on emergency plans and drills and the recommendations we have and requirements for Oregon schools. My name is Alex Hayslip. I'm the program manager for the School Safety and Emergency Management Program here at the Oregon Department of Education, where we provide training and technical assistance to districts, just like through this session here, for emergency preparedness. So we'll go into the agenda first and we'll get it going. So what we're going to go through today first is what we are and why we're doing it. The bottom line up front, what everybody wants to know, what rule changes there are and the requirements that you're going to have going into the 26-27 school year. Then we're going to follow that up by the recommendations that we have to make sure that you have a robust and complete emergency preparedness plan for your school or district that includes things that will build on what those requirements are for Oregon schools. And then we'll have a conclusion, we'll wrap it up, we'll finish the recording, and then we'll move into the question and answer session or any calls that you may have for requests for assistance. So to start things off with, I want to stress what we are, what we do, and why we do it. And I normally don't like to read off the slides, but this one is, I think, too important to leave just to briefly explain what's in here. So our task is to ensure every community has the knowledge to respond to any disaster or other event that threatens the safety of the community and access available resources to aid mitigation, response, and recovery. And we do this in order to maintain a safe and welcoming environment for our schools and the community they learn in so every person can thrive. You'll see throughout this presentation as we get into some of the recommendations following the requirements portion of this presentation, how important that community is and that collaboration component is for our emergency preparedness. So first up, what are the rule changes? What's the requirements changes that we're going to be looking at going into next year? So first up, the comprehensive safety program now clearly identifies what drills, what safety threat actions, what plans you have to include in your emergency operations plan or safety plan for your school district. And that includes what is now aligned with the standard response protocol. There's 5 protocols, and those must be drilled and included in your plan. That does not require that you use the standard response protocol, but you have to have plans at least related to the protocols that are identified in the SRP or the standard response protocol. And previously, the old statute and the rule that were getting updated should pass in May ahead of the 26-27 school year. Although those requirements are in statute, the rule has not been completely updated yet. But it previously used old requirements. So some of you out there, I know we've heard from some districts that are pretty sharp about identifying what's in statute. And they're like, hey, the SRP language, that's old stuff that's in the statute. That's correct. We got that fixed. So now the statute and the rule, when it gets updated, is going to have the language that is with the contemporary standard response protocol so that it aligns. We're all using the same language. Again, not required to use the SRP, but you have to have plans at least related to those 5 protocols in the SRP. The second thing is it requires a consideration of your school board, the consideration of a wireless panic alarm system. And some folks are thinking this is Alyssa's Law. It's kind of more Alyssa's Law adjacent because it does not require you to purchase or install those systems. There's no money being provided for those if your district chooses to do so. But it will require your school board to consider the purchase and installation of those systems if you do not have them. Finally, the update is the safety program will require, or your EOP will require the inclusion of the communicable disease management and responding to medical emergencies plans that are already identified in the health services rule. They've not been previously identified for inclusion in an emergency operations plan or safety plan. So you're already doing these things. We're just trying to streamline and make sure that when we're talking about emergency operations plan, we're talking about the whole package, including responding to medical emergencies and potentially responding to communicable disease in our communities. One other thing I should note, for that, and I know we already changed slides, but we're also removing the requirements for accident prevention and lab safety from the rule for emergency plans and drills. We're doing that because it's not supported in statute and it's out of scope for emergency plans, emergency operations plans for schools. That does not exempt anybody from following OSHA requirements for workplace safety, et cetera, but just know that we're removing those as what would be a reporting requirement component for your district for under Division 22. So moving on specifically to the school drill requirements. Again, current year, I've put these slides, stacked them together. So we're looking at current year now and what the change is going to be next year. So just reviewing really quickly what the current year requirements are. Have to instruct and drill students on your emergency procedures at least 30 minutes a month. And most of that time is going to be taken up with those emergency drills that you're conducting during the month, right? Fire emergencies still required monthly per fire code. Earthquakes required twice a year. If you're in a tsunami zone, you have to do that 3 times a year. And the safety threats, so what was under the old SRP and the old language that was in statute and rule included lockdown, what had previously been called lockout, or secure, shelter, and evacuate. Each of those had to be done twice a year. And that was under the old Oregon Revised Statute 336071 that you see referenced there at the bottom of the slide. Has been updated for next year going into the 26-27 school year. So next year, we're looking at some minor changes. So you still have the requirement to drill and instruct students on those emergency procedures with at least 30 minutes per month. You still have the fire emergencies requirement, that evacuate protocol. Something's hazardous inside the building or you need to move folks around. You have to do that monthly, still required in Oregon Fire Code, State Fire Code. Earthquakes are still required twice per each school year. If you're in a tsunami zone, you're still required to drill earthquake and tsunami 3 times per year. The change here is going to be those safety threat actions, or what would be identified in the standard response protocol. Lockdown, secure, shelter, hold is now added, and evacuate. You only need to conduct 1 drill of each of those during the school year. So a reduction in the number of drills per protocol, but we're adding the hold protocol. So talking about planning requirements. So some small changes to the planning requirements going into the next school year. So for the 26-27 school year, include in your plans, it's now clearly identified that the plans must include the responses related to the standard response protocol. Not required to adopt again, but required to have plans related to each one of those. So going down the list really quick, we're talking about lockdown, have plans related to responding to a threat that is inside the building. For secure, have a plan that's related to a threat or hazard that exists outside the building that you want to get kids inside and away from that threat or hazard. For hold, if you need to control or contain a situation to respond to improve the health and safety of the response to that situation inside the building, you have to have a plan related to the hold protocol. For shelter, if there's an environmental emergency outside, you need to know how to shelter inside. What is your plan and procedure for sheltering for hazards outside? And then finally, if there's a hazard that is existing inside the building that makes it unsafe, you have a plan for evacuating the building. So you have to have plans related to each one of those actions. You also have to include plans, just like I said, for communicable disease management and medical emergencies. No change there again, but we're making sure that folks understand we want to consolidate all those in an emergency operations plan as a singular package. Now, the review of your emergency operations plan or safety plan is now required every 2 years, or will be required every 2 years. And during that review, you have to consider emergency alert systems for purchase and install and record consideration in the board minutes during that review if your board chooses not to purchase those systems. Again, not required to purchase, but required to consider them to improve the safety and security of your school buildings and district. All right, so there are other requirements in statute I want to stress here, because as we're getting into the recommendations portion, community collaboration and reliance on outside support is so important. So one of the things we want to stress here is in statute, it does identify that units of local government, your emergency responders, your firefighters, police, etc., they shall review emergency procedures proposed by you, your schools, your districts, ESDs, and assist in instruction and drilling. And highly recommend bringing them out to help observe those drills, identify what you're doing, understand what they're doing, so that you can collaborate and run a smooth response should they be needed. And for ODE requirements, this is why we're here today. We have to develop in consultation with the Oregon Department of Emergency Management guidance that we provide to you all on making sure that your schools and districts are safe with effective emergency preparedness procedures, and providing that instruction as needed. So not just now, if you have questions or would like additional resources, personalized assistance, please feel free to reach out, give us a call. We can set something up to come out and help you. But one of the things I want to make sure that we're centering is, before we start going into the recommendations that we have for schools and districts here in Oregon, is it's one thing to discuss, review, even put into place rules or guidelines, even statutes to say, hey, this is what you have to do for safety. But what is the real reason we're doing these things? We're doing it for the safety, security of the people in our care, and for ourselves, our families, our friends inside the school building. We want to make sure that we're establishing effective response priorities that make sure that we can get them home safely at the end of the day. All right. We want to make sure, finally, that we're practicing and exercising those so that everybody knows what they need to do in the event of emergency before they need to do it. So that makes it second nature. So they get in, get out, go home safely at the end of the day. So our recommendations and our guidance for schools and districts here in Oregon cover these, what we call the 6 pillars of emergency preparedness for schools here in Oregon. They cover things from community collaboration. How are you planning and coordinating your planning and preparedness efforts with your local responders, with your other community partners? Are you planning for those students and staff who may need additional assistance during an emergency or disaster? For those what we call access and functional needs people. You have incident command system fundamentals in place for your response. Are you making sure that you have identified roles and responsibilities ahead of time before they're needed? Assessments, and this involves everything from identifying what you need a plan for to assessing your plans and identifying, hey, what works, what doesn't, and how are we improving those and making ourselves as prepared and ready as possible. And then the meat and potatoes of your actual emergency operations plan, that you're putting all of those in to your functional annexes, what is going to be mostly consumed by the standard response protocol and the plans and responses that are outlined there. And then the incident specific plans, a lot of times that are identified and informed by the assessments you do for your specific community and your environment. And throughout all of these, community collaboration is probably one of the more important components of all of this, because we can't respond. We're not going to respond in a vacuum, and we're going to always have to have somebody come out and help us if it's a major emergency or disaster. So you'll see as we're going through these 6 pillars, how community collaboration is coming up in each and every one of those. And that's why it's the first one that we'll address. So I'll go through these briefly, one by one, and then at the end we'll have highlights, and then we'll go into the question and answer session if you have any. But first up, again, community collaboration. Who are you bringing to the table? There's a common refrain, and for those of you who've visited maybe some of our training, or even the I Love You Guys Foundation training on the standard response protocols or otherwise. There's a common refrain that schools own the students, police own the crime, fire owns the fire. And I think that is so great. It's such a great quote because it identifies and clearly delineates, hey, when the alarm goes off, when that fire alarm gets pulled, you all are responsible for making sure that those kids get out to a safe area and then get sent home safely. You're not putting out the fire. You're going to call 911, and hopefully those fire engines are in short response and they're coming in to make the school safe. But we're stressing here in this component, you have your job, they have their job, and we need to identify how we're working together to make sure that we're sending the kids home safe at the end of the day. So our guidance covers a whole approach to identifying who should be involved in your planning team, that whole community approach, how to collaborate together on your emergency drills and your exercises, because we've seen constantly where we've been at a school or district, well, I won't say constantly, but we've seen it fairly frequently, where a certain procedure or process that the school is using, it may seem great at the time, it may seem great because they were planning without their community partners, but then they bring that police chief over, that fire chief, and they recognize, hey, this doesn't work because we got to park our fire engines right here where you're assembling. Have those drills and exercises together so that they know what you're doing and you know what they're doing. And this QR code will take you directly to the community collaboration guidance document. Now, bear in mind, we will have a resources tab at the end of this, and we'll share out the slides as well. So you don't have to worry about screenshotting or going to those links directly right now. But second, who are we planning for? So we will have folks who might need additional assistance during an emergency. What we want to avoid is leaving them in the stairwell and just say, hey, we're going to come back and get you. That's not an effective response, and we should be much better prepared, not only for ourselves, but for our students who need that additional assistance ahead of time, so that when an emergency does take place, we're getting everybody out, not just the ones who can physically move right now. And bear in mind that sometimes we're going to have some folks who are typically physically able, may break a leg, may have other kind of health complications during the course of the school year that may impede their ability to respond effectively by themselves, and they may need additional help. We want to make sure that school and district officials and administrators have these folks in mind before they have to use or respond to a disaster or emergency. Because again, what we don't want is people left behind because we didn't properly prepare ahead of time. One of the ways we do that, and one of the ways we recommend schools and districts consider folks who need additional assistance during an emergency, is the personal emergency accommodation plan. And this it was developed several years ago now, but it's a very simple form that goes down. It provides a quick reference for what the individual's needs are and what accommodations they might need during each of the 5 protocols and for other situations as well. One of the things you'll notice if you have really sharp eyes in this screenshot here is the contacts and responsible persons section there, and there are other sections in there as well for people who are involved in the planning or review process for a PEEP, just like this. Now, I bring that up because the first one, we're talking about community collaboration. Now we're talking about collaboration even inside our building. Who's going to be responsible for helping a student downstairs if they need additional assistance during evacuation? Those folks need to be in the room when we're going through these personal emergency accommodation plans or the PEEPs, so that we have the folks necessary that can identify what needs to be done and how it can be done safely and effectively, and the family and the student themselves, right? So if you do scan this QR code, you'll get a downloadable Word document that you can fill in and use for your school district. But again, we'll include links to all these and references at the end as well. So I'm just giving you a heads up in case you were scanning this. It will provide a download to your device. So the next concept or pillar for emergency preparedness is ICS, the Incident Command System. And this may seem like a nebulous concept for a lot of schools and districts, but at the very least, we want to stress a few things for school and district officials and folks planning for their school and their emergency plans. Is make sure you have at least these key concepts in mind and have identified roles and responsibilities ahead of time. So we'll go down these briefly, but we'll try to explain a few of them. And again, we do have a guidance document that addresses ICS for schools specifically. First, a common terminology. Again, that's one of those why we recommend and promote the use of the standard response protocol, because it standardizes language, standardizes the response language for your school or district, and standardizes that response language for your whole community as well. Now, I know, especially in education, even if you're talking to your law enforcement or fire folks, everybody's got their own acronyms and jargon when it comes to their day-to-day job or otherwise. Think about your community partners and when those fire engines show up, when the police car shows up. Keep in mind they might not use the same language you do. So that's one of the reasons why common terminology is stressed. Unity of command. We see this a lot of times in a lot of situations, not just with schools, but other organizations as well, where you have one person reporting to multiple supervisors. Or in the case of the next one, span of control, where you have 20 people reporting to one person. Those are not effective strategies for responding to an emergency, because now that might work on a day-to-day basis, but now when the stakes are much higher and you have people running around wondering what to do, it's much more difficult to control those situations and folks when they're spread all over the place, and your span of control or your unit of command is disjointed or overstressed. So keep some of these key concepts in mind when you're developing your plans for responding to emergencies. And finally, for the key concepts here, multiple organizations working together. What happens? Do you know what they're doing? Do they know what you're doing? When we talk about unified command, this is another community collaboration point. Where are the fire trucks staging? Where are the police cars staging when they show up to your campus? Where are you evacuating and assembling? Where are you moving to if you have to go to a reunification site? How are you coordinating your efforts? And you do that by identifying a unified command. Who's in charge for your school or district, and who's in charge for the response? Identify those touch points ahead of time so you're not scrambling to figure out who's in charge of what and going where. I'm going to briefly go over these next couple slides on ICS, because you'll get a lot more detailed information in the guidance document, and if you ever ask us to review ICS or anything like that for your school specifically. But a couple key things I wanted to point out in these next ones. Identify those roles and responsibilities early and ahead of time. And that's a key component of emergency planning in general. If you identify those roles and responsibilities, don't just identify who's initially responsible, because that superintendent, that principal, they might be at conference. Maybe their backup, their kid is sick and they're home taking care of the kid instead of being at school and responding to whatever emergency you might have that day. So identify not only backups, but third level backups, and make sure that they know what they're doing should an emergency occur at your school or district. That includes not just what these shortened list roles that you see here, from incident commander, communication, transportation, etc., but other actions. There's accountability and other maybe facility roles that you might need to respond to during an emergency. So as we're getting into assessments, what are we planning for, and how are we identifying what we need to plan for? A threat is typically a human-caused action. Hazard is typically environmental. And we're identifying those high frequency threats and hazards in our area, and then we're assessing that risk to identify which ones we should plan for first, right? It might be the case that everywhere on Earth might have a hazard of a meteor strike, but is the risk really there? Probably not. So we're probably not going to develop a plan for a meteor strike. But considering our location and the environment we've had here in Oregon over the last several years, and looking forward to this summer and next year, wildfires are a high frequency hazard and they're a high risk hazard for Oregon. That's why that's one of those recommended plans that we would recommend schools and districts include in their emergency operations plan. So as we're going through our risk and hazard assessment, one way to help you all out is identify and know those threats and hazards, but contact your local or county emergency manager because they've already gone through a threat and hazard assessment for your county. They know what those are, what's present, and tell you, hey, these are the things that we think you should plan and prepare for now. If you are subscribed to our newsletter that goes out monthly, you'll notice on the second page of every newsletter, we can always include a link to the county emergency management contacts across the state. So if you're ever thinking, oh shoot, who is my county emergency contact? It's in our newsletter every month, second page in those links and resources section down there. So again, another community collaboration component or touch point, even going through this far into the 6 pillars. Have those contacts at your fingertips so that you can identify what those high risk threat and hazards are in your area so you can plan and prepare for them. Another component of assessments in schools is assessing what just happened during a drill or an exercise. Even if you are responding to a real world emergency, take a moment to assess, conduct an after action review. That's what an AAR stands for, an after action review, on what just happened. What happened? What was supposed to happen and what did happen? Go through the list. That bottom bullet that you see bolded and underlined, that is the purpose of this exercise here. Who's responsible for implementing the improvements and when? If you're going through an emergency drill and you conduct one of these AARs, you're going through the questions, you're identifying, hey, shoot, we should make sure that this door catch is fixed for next time. Or we should make sure that this hallway is cleaned out because if it's not, that's the backup evacuation route for this classroom. That's how you get a robust and resilient emergency operations plan and a very prepared community by doing these ARs at the end of it. That will build your resilience more than almost anything else here, except for community collaboration, all the others. So how do we do it? Now we're talking about more specifically the things that are included in your emergency operations plan. And that starts with the functional annexes. The functional annexes are the plans that you're going to use, that you're going to adapt to any threat or hazard, some of those incident specific hazards that you might have additional plans for. To help simplify this for most folks, the standard response protocol essentially would take up most of the space in the functional annexes section of your emergency operations plan, because those can be adapted and adjusted for just about any emergency or disaster that you might encounter. Those are the consistent response types that you're going to be using across the whole breadth of your preparedness posture. So include those first. And there's a couple others that we recommend including that includes a communications plan, because you're going to have to communicate to families in your community, no matter which kind of disaster or response that you're implementing. And also a reunification plan, because it could be an environmental disaster or a human-caused disaster that may require you to leave the campus and relocate and reunify elsewhere. So it's one of those adaptable ones that can be used for any kind of situation. How do we implement that though? we recommend having a drill calendar. And we have a recommended drill calendar on our website, and it does address current year requirements. That will be adapted and updated later this summer for next year's requirements. But for current year requirements, you can go see our recommended emergency drill plan outline on our website. And that has identified protocols and things that you would drill by month based on essentially what we address month to month for schools and districts in our training and technical assistance sessions and our recommended training calendar for schools during the year. But have these established ahead of time. And one of the things we recommend going even into the communication component is communicate what you're planning ahead during the year. That doesn't mean you're identifying, hey, on Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, we're conducting a secure drill. No, don't always announce those, because the entire point and purpose of doing a drill is identifying, can your students and staff, can they respond to a response, a drill that is called and at the moment without being guided through from the beginning. The point of the drill is, can you execute the essential functions without getting told step by step, hey, this is where we're at. The good example of this is if you're announcing an evacuate and you have your elementary teachers already lining up the kids, getting ready to go, and they're looking at their watch knowing, hey, it's coming up in a couple minutes, I'm ready. Does that mean that they would have effectively corralled the kids if the alarm went off at 2 in the afternoon and or 2:15 in the afternoon instead of 2? We need to be able to practice those actions at odd and unusual times to make sure that we're ready ahead of time. So have those identified maybe by month, or have that calendar so that you're staying accountable with your drills. But make sure you're communicating with not only your community but your parents, saying, hey, this is what we're doing to stay safe, and let them know, hey, these are the protocols that we're using. It gives them greater peace of mind knowing that, one, you're planning and preparing for it, but two, that you've got a plan and are looking out for the safety and security of their students. Again, another plug for the incident response protocol. Again, for requirements here in Oregon, you don't have to adopt this, but have plans related to this. Again, we love this because it is standardizing the language. They're free resources. It addresses any kind of threat or hazard that a school or district may require. And the standard reunification method. Now, I'm going to give a plug for our program. We are going to be doing a reunification exercise and training event in Redmond here this Thursday. If you're unable to attend, or you weren't able to get on the registration list for this week, if that is something that your school or district is interested in getting training or an exercise on, let us know. We're happy to come out, bring the crew out, and walk your school or district through how to make sure that you do this effectively. Because again, this is one of those that may be required from any district anywhere. And it's something that may be required because of a wildfire, not just an active shooter event. Maybe a wildfire requires you to evacuate early, or some gas leak or some other event may require you to evacuate and reunify offsite. And it's a very complicated and deliberate process we recommend that you follow. But we recommend standard reunification method and including that in your functional indexes. Finally, incident-specific plans. Now, what we've got here is a list of what we recommend for schools. A couple of them are required. So earthquake drills are required. Recommend you have an incident-specific plan for responding to earthquake emergencies. Communicable disease management and medical emergencies are required already, and you should have those in place already. But additional incident-specific plans, we're talking about those high frequency threats and hazards, and those high risk threats and hazards that you and your mostly across the state, here is what we're recommending here. but that you may encounter in your school or district. Wildfire, again, we talked about that briefly a little bit before. Active shooter, it's potential for any community. Bomb threat, we've seen those across the state just in the last couple of years. And cybersecurity, that's a common threat that we see almost monthly, weekly here in Oregon and across the country. Now, for schools in tsunami inundation zones, you are required to have a plan and drill for tsunamis. And one of the things we want to stress is that schools that are in locations that are susceptible to landslides or floods, make sure you have plans specific to those as well. And again, for each one of these, we're talking about what standard response protocol would you use, and then what would be successive for the response to any of these types of incident specific things we might encounter. So for a wildfire, we may have to evacuate, and then we're going to be transported to a reunification site. So there's evacuate and reunify. For active shooter, we're going to go to lockdown, and then we're going to evacuate and then reunify. So you can see how you're identifying those specific incidents that you might need to chain or put in consecutive standard response protocols that are going to get you and your students and staff home safely at the end of the day. So to wrap up here, major takeaways. First off, I want to stress what is required going into the 26-27 changes for required drills. Again, only one per protocol, but that involves all 5 of the protocols. That's lockdown, secure, hold, evacuate, and shelter. So we're adding that hold protocol, but we're reducing the requirements to only one drill of each of those that is required. Again, SRP adoption is not required, but what those protocols are designed to respond to, you have to have plans in place for each one of what those protocols are designed to respond to. Wireless panic alarms have to be considered. You're not required to purchase them. And then one of the things we do want to stress is our guidance is what we recommend to make sure that your school or district is effectively prepared for any type of emergency you may encounter. That is above and beyond what the basic bare minimum requirements are for the school or district. Please consider those 6 pillars and how you're going to adapt them for your school or district. And again, if you need assistance or help with that, please feel free to let us know or ask for our assistance. Now, I'm briefly going to show this slide here. This is links to most of the things that we're referencing here in this presentation. Again, following this presentation, we're going to send out a follow-up email to everybody that is going to include a link to these slides so that you can reference them directly. And to stress for folks here how we can help, we provide a number of methods and ways that we can come out and help the district for any of these, whether that's training or technical assistance, coming out in person, site safety assessment, so we can help you identify what your existing hazards are within your own environment, within your own schools. Help with those threat and hazard assessments, connecting you even with your county emergency managers, helping you develop those emergency operations plans, for including tabletop exercises to test those plans that you may have, connecting you with other resources, training opportunities, webinars just like this. And if you're not signed up, recommend you sign up for our monthly newsletter and communication with additional contacts and resources. And with that, if you need, here's a QR code for our regional contact page, and we can put a link for that also in the chat. And with that, I will stop recording, but I will leave this slide up temporarily while we're going through questions and comments, and so that folks can hit our contact page if we need to.